tired of pictures, maybe you want to listen to the radio.
If you do, you better run.
9 to noon.
Bye, everyone. Bye. Be safe.
Thanks, guys. President Trump taking Texas by storm, doubling down on the calls for border security as lawmakers reach what is considered a tentative deal. The question today is, though, whether or not the president would sign it. We're going to find out when we get live to the White House next hour. In the meantime, good morning, everybody. I'm Bill Hemmer, live in New York. How are you?
Good morning, Bill. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sandra Smith. Bipartisan lawmakers reaching a, quote, agreement in principle as we inch closer to the next shutdown deadline. But a lot of big things need to happen before that proposal becomes law. For starters, the deal has to be negotiated by Congress and then signed by the president.
But the devil is always in the details. We know the president wanted $5.7 billion. Sources say it's looking more like $1.3. Here is some from El Paso last night with the president.
This weekend, some Democrats even proposed a measure that would force the release of thousands of criminal illegal aliens, including dangerous felons. We're setting the stage. We're setting the table. We're doing whatever we have to do. The wall's being built. It'll continue. It's going at a rapid pace. Drugs pouring through the border kills tens of thousands of innocent Americans a year, including heroin, meth, cocaine, fentanyl, so many others. They come through the southern border.
We will hear from former House Speaker Newt Gingrich on this. But first to Kevin Corke, live from the White House this morning to kick things off. Kevin, good morning.
Good morning, Sandra. An agreement in principle, as you know, that is Washington speak for. We'll see what happens, because as you and Bill pointed out, there's still plenty of horse trading to be done here in the nation's capital. That is if, and it's a big if, the deal will eventually cross the finish line here at the White House. Now, under Monday's tentative agreement, which has to still be fleshed out by congressional staff, the White House would get money for a barrier, about $1.3 billion. As Bill pointed out, that's far less than asked for by the president and would amount to, as some congressional officials have labeled it, a bit of a down payment. Democrats also gave up on a demand to lower the cap on immigrant detention beds in the interior of the U.S. In all, you're looking at about 55 miles of new border barrier. Now, news of that tentative agreement happened just as the president was speaking to tens of thousands thousands last night in El Paso, Texas, as was, by the way, Beto O'Rourke.
We were all challenged by a young man who lost an election to Ted Cruz. So we have, let's say, 35,000 people tonight, and he has 200 people, 300 people. Not too good.
Walls do not save lives. Walls end lives. In one of the safest cities in the United States of America. Safe, not because of walls, but in spite of walls.
Not quite 35,000, Mr. President. More like 6,500 inside, but obviously several thousand outside for that Trump rally in El Paso. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, GOP lawmakers, Sandra, are hopeful that something will get worked out, but they're obviously still skeptical. They have to give this plan a much closer look.
The president asked for more than that. He asked for dollars for new technology, for deterrence, for more border agents, dollars to help work off the backlog along the border of these cases. And so, like most lawmakers, I want to dig into exactly what this spending bill gives to states like Texas.
Always interesting to listen to Kevin Brady. He's just so smart on these issues. Don't forget, we have a cabinet spray coming up later this morning. Our chance to hear from the president, Sandra. Of course, I'll bring it to you then. But for now, back to you.
Great stuff, Kevin. Thank you.
A lot to get to with Newt Gingrich back with us today, former Speaker of the House and Fox News contributor. And thank you for coming back today. It's good to have you on here. There's a lot we don't know about the border security deal. I don't know if it's a deal or not. We will see in time. Would you take what's on the table based on what we're hearing and allow both sides to claim victory? What would you do?
Well, look, I think, first of all, there's a certain value to not closing the government again. The president's popularity on polling yesterday is the highest it's been since the inaugural. So he's got some real momentum coming out of the State of the Union and a chance to continue building his agenda. I think they've got to look at the details, but if they get a reasonably good down payment, I also think that the Office of Management and Budget has probably found $4 or $5 billion that they can reprogram, and the president could, by next week, sign the congressional bill, keep the government open, pocket about $1.7 billion or $1.3 billion in the bill itself, and transfer an additional $4 or $5 billion. So he would get the barrier he wants. The country would see the government stay open. The Democrats would have gotten nothing except to prove that they're insanely anti-blocking illegal immigrants. I mean, the idea that they wanted to cut 7,000 beds that detain illegals is the sort of stuff that I think is driving the Democratic Party towards a disaster in 2020.
Let me come back to that in a moment here. I want to talk, too, about the freshman Democrat Ilhan Omar, who has apologized for her anti-Semitic tweets that went out over the weekend and over the past few days. Here's part of her apology. Anti-Semitism is real, she writes, and I'm grateful for Jewish allies and colleagues who are educating me on the painful history of anti-Semitic tropes. My intention is never to offend my constituents or Jewish Americans as a whole. This is why I unequivocally apologize. The last line of that same statement reads, I reaffirm the problematic role of lobbyists in our politics, whether it be AIPAC, the NRA, or the fossil fuel industry. How did you read that statement, that apology, Mr. Speaker?
Look, I think the last line is a liberal throwaway line. I mean, she could also put in there several Muslim activist groups that are sort of the parallel to AIPAC, but she didn't. Look, this is a freshman who is a radical. She's part of what's moving the Democratic Party to the left. She's part of a growing anti-Semitism in the Democratic Party. There's no question that there are a number of Democrats now who do not want to defend Israel or protect Israel and who are prepared to see Israel disappear. I think that her apology was what she had to do. It tells you how strong Nancy Pelosi is, that I suspect Speaker Pelosi coerced her into that apology.
In a bigger sense, we came across two pieces earlier today, just so our viewers are aware. One is in Politico. It calls The Trio of Dem Villains. That's the article. The headline is Superstar Freshman Dems Replace Pelosi as GOP Targets. In it, the first line says, the Republican Party has a new trio of Democratic villains, Rashida Tlaib, Michigan, Ilhan Omar, Minnesota, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from here in New York. When you read that piece, Mr. Speaker, if you get a chance for that, then go to Jerry Sei's piece in the Wall Street Journal. His headline, Democrats face great opportunity and high peril. And he details about the level of anger on the left and how they're able to either manufacture that in a productive way or turn it into a message of hope. Now, you just reflected on 2020 in this campaign. You have two more enter the race over the weekend. What do you think they do with those themes?
Look, I think the Democratic Party is running to the left as fast as it can. It reminds me a great deal of the cycle that led to George McGovern. If you'll notice, people who are coming out, I mean, the person I regard as the most interesting Democratic candidate so far, Kamala Harris, is now in a position where she says she wants to take away everybody's private health insurance. That's 170 million people. Only 15% of the country wants you to take away their insurance. I mean, you're going to see case after case. The entire proposal that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has made, she's actually put in a resolution form. And frankly, I think that Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans ought to demand to bring that resolution up. Let's get an up or down vote, because it's mostly crazy. It's stuff that will not work, will not happen. And when people learn the details, they'll think that what you have here is a radical from a big city who has no idea how the rest of America operates. And I think this is the flavor. This isn't just an occasional random person. This is the flavor of the party, which in many ways Bernie Sanders helped create in a backlash against Hillary Clinton. And this is now a big part of the Democratic Party.
Speaking of Democratic Party, how do they get out of this mess in the state of Virginia?
Well, a very clever friend of mine who's a very good lawyer said the answer would be for the lieutenant governor to resign, the governor to appoint a new person who has been thoroughly vetted, then the governor resigns, then the new person would appoint someone to replace themselves as lieutenant governor. The attorney general would just stay quiet and hope nobody notices him. And if you're purely a cynical Democrat trying to solve an embarrassing problem, that would technically do it. Short of that, given what's now happening with the lieutenant governor, where I understand that his law firm has suspended him pending an investigation, And given what's happened with the governor, who looked just goofy last week, trying to explain that he really wasn't in the picture that was in the yearbook that he originally thought he was in, but now he's looked at it again, and it's really not him. You have to ask yourself, you get a yearbook in medical school. You open it to your own page, right? I mean, everybody watching knows you look at your own page. He didn't notice this. He didn't say, oh, gosh, that's not me. Or as he first said, it was him. And you look at what Northam has done, all of it, by the way, triggered because his radical position on killing babies after they're born led somebody who was a classmate of his to go back and find this page. This page was a direct result. It was ultimately leaked to the media by somebody who was so angry that Northam was defending killing babies after they're born.
You did a good job of listing what we've been watching there in Virginia. I didn't hear a resolution out, so that might leave us a bit of an indicator as to how difficult it will be for that state to organize things yet again. Mr. Speaker, thank you for your time.
If Northam doesn't want to leave, Bill, if Northam doesn't want to leave, I don't think they're going to be able to impeach him. He's going to be there. He may embarrass the Democrats. He may split the Democrats. But if he's determined not to leave, I don't see a mechanism to force him out. So far, he suggested that.
Thank you, sir. Newt Gingrich there with us today. Come on back, okay?
Thanks.
Much more to cover. Thank you, Sandra.
Nice to hear from the former speaker. Meanwhile, we've got a big show ahead. Much more on the border security agreement with former acting ICE Director Thomas Homan. He will be joining us at 9:40 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll get his thoughts this morning. Our headliner, White House Deputy Press Secretary Hogan Gidley, will join us at the top of the 10 o'clock hour. We'll also be speaking with House Minority Whip Steve Scalise at 11. A lot of newsmakers coming up, a lot to get to with all of them.
Can you believe State of the Union was 1 week ago today?
Hard to believe.
Holy cow.
Lots
okay,
happened.
12 minutes past now. Other big stories today. Acting Defense Secretary Pat Shanahan landing in Baghdad this morning. He's going to be meeting with top military officials on the ground, as well as Iraqi government leaders on the future U.S. troop presence there. So more on his trip and the message that we're learning from it, Sam.
Plus, why Democratic presidential candidate Amy Klobuchar says don't call her a moderate, call her a progressive. Plus, why Democratic presidential candidate Amy Klobuchar says don't call her a moderate, call her a progressive.
Self-proclaimed socialist, the Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and her Green New Deal. The RNC chair is Ronna McDaniel. She will react to that New Deal coming up next.
Spend $100 trillion, which, by the way, there's no such thing as $100 trillion. You have to spend $100 trillion. And remember this, no other country. Last week, they introduced a massive government takeover that would destroy our incredible economic gains. They introduced the so-called Green New Deal. It sounds like a high school term paper that got a low mark.
So President Trump now taking shots at the Green New Deal as chief architect, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She helped front the deal with other lawmakers last week. She fired right back at the president. Want to bring in Ronna McDaniel, RNC chairwoman. How you doing, Ronna? Good morning to you. I see you're in Washington today, so enjoy the swamp while you've got it. AOC responded this way. Yes, a man who can't even read briefings written in full sentences is providing literary criticism of a House resolution. Then she links to a piece in the Washington Post. How are you reacting to that today, Ronna?
Well, I think the president was being generous, saying that it was a high school paper that would get bad marks. My daughter is a sophomore in high school. She would have received a failing grade if she'd have put forward what Ocasio-Cortez did. Listen, you've heard her advisor all over TV last week saying, oh, people were making things up about their Green New Deal. They hadn't read the version that they'd put up that said unwilling to work, getting rid of air travel in 10 years. Now they're saying there's a version 2 and a version 3 and a version 4. They didn't proofread this huge deal, this monstrosity that they're putting forward, a total government takeover. The president is 100% correct when he says this will absolutely take away all the economic gains we've seen as a country if this is implemented. She has no idea. She is working in theory, and she doesn't understand the reality of what she's proposing.
Did you hear Newt Gingrich a moment ago while you were there in Washington, D.C.? Did you hear that interview?
I did.
I mentioned this Jerry Seib piece in the Wall Street Journal today. I just want to pull 2 lines from it, okay? Here's what Seib writes. More broadly, the party increasingly is identified with policy proposals that are easy for Republicans to caricature as left-wing extremism, he continues. Democrats could appear to be succumbing to the national mood of anger when the better image might be of hope. What do you think of that?
Well, I think the State of the Union exemplified that as the president's talking about the lowest unemployment in history for the African American and Hispanic communities, and you can't see a single Democrat clap their hands when you see them sitting on their hands after every economic achievement is being put forward by this president. They have no ability to work across the aisle with this president, and they do seem to not like Republicans at all and unwilling to work with them. It's their way or no way. So I do think that that isn't going to play in the middle of this country. And let's look at what they're proposing. And I say this all the time. Democrats are pie in the sky. We're going to have free college for everyone. You know what, Bill? We have kids right now who can't read in the 3rd grade. We have kids who aren't graduating from high school in states like mine in Detroit. Why aren't we worrying about the kids that aren't getting through our education system, who don't even have an opportunity for college, before we start saying, let's give free college to everyone? So those are the things that Republicans are focusing on when we say school choice. Let's give kids better opportunity. Democrats want to put all these things in a bucket and say, we don't know how we're going to pay for it, but it sounds great. We're focused on real ideas.
You had 2 more enter the race over the weekend, as you know. Amy Klobuchar on Sunday, Elizabeth Warren on Saturday. Klobuchar was on MSNBC last night. She was asked a question as to whether or not she should be seen as a moderate. You know, Minnesota, everybody says she'll play well in that part of the country. Places like Wisconsin, Iowa, perhaps. This was how she answered the suggestion that she is a moderate.
I think they should see me as a progressive because I believe in progress, and I have worked toward progress my whole life.
So how do you analyze that when you're kicking that term to the side?
Well, she's definitely trying to have it both ways. She's this Midwest nice. I understand the middle of the country, which our party has lost and forgotten that voice. But then she goes on Rachel Maddow and says she's a progressive. I'm going to be interested to see her interview with Bret Baier on Fox News today to see if she comes to the middle again and says she's a moderate. She absolutely votes as a progressive. She's with Chuck Schumer all the time. She signed on to this Green New Deal. So I do think she identified herself correctly, but she's going to try and play that Midwest moderate as well to get both sides of the aisle.
We'll see Bret tonight and Amy Klobuchar at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you, Ronna, for coming back here.
Thank you.
We saw the Capitol building behind you. It looks like a chilly day there in Washington, D.C. By the way, do you think you've got a deal on the border or not?
I think our president has done such a phenomenal job leading. I mean, Nancy Pelosi said not $1. So I haven't seen all the details of the deal, but we've definitely moved it a lot further from not $1 for the wall. The president's right. This is a crisis. He's listening to our ICE agents, our CBP personnel who are saying this is a crisis at our border. And thank goodness for him for leading on this very pressing issue that affects every American.
I'll put you down as a maybe. Ronna McDaniel, thank you for coming in today. Talk soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra.
Confidence in the U.S. economy is growing. Optimism about personal finances hitting a 16-year high, according to a new poll. So what is driving this? Charles Payne will be here to tell us. Plus, as President Trump doubles down on the need for a border wall, California's governor says he's pulling his National Guard troops from the border, at least some of them. So where is the disconnect?
Driver of a car survived a terrifying crash with a semi-truck on an interstate in Ohio. That front end of the car pinned between a concrete barrier and the truck. Officials say one person injured, not seriously, and weather played a significant role in that crash. Big weather system moving across the country. Keep an eye on that.
Fox News alert California's governor calling out President Trump. Gavin Newsom planning to pull most of his National Guard troops from the border with Mexico after the president expressed concerns about a crisis at the border.
The crisis on the border is a manufactured crisis. We are not interested in participating in this political theater. I think it's nothing more than political theater.
Jonathan Hunt is live from our Los Angeles bureau with more on this morning. Jonathan, good morning.
Sandra, good morning to you. Governor Newsom, as you heard, calls it theater, but it's clearly the theater of war in this case, at least in the verbal sense, part of an ongoing battle between California and the Trump administration, with the front line being the fight over immigration. So Governor Newsom is reversing a decision made by former Governor Jerry Brown and directly defying President Trump by pulling the majority of California National Guard troops from the border, telling the president to continue doing the job himself if he wants it done through federal troops that Mr. Trump has already announced will be deployed to the border.
If you're going to add 3,750 troops to the border, why do you need the National Guard? The whole thing is ludicrous.
Now, the governor says he has been convinced by officials that National Guard troops are helping in combating drug smuggling. So he is leaving 100 of the roughly 360 National Guard troops in place.
The real issue is drugs, the issue of guns. And on the issue of drugs, we actually have seen some success with our current deployment, and that's the issue that I want to tackle.
But some Republican California politicians argue all the troops should stay for anti-drug and anti-gang work, and they accuse the governor of grandstanding. State Assemblywoman Melissa Melendez saying, for instance, quote, "That's not a game. I don't think people ought to be caught in the middle of this political fray between California and the Trump administration." Now, we're likely to hear a lot more on all this from Gavin Newsom in a few hours' time when he lays out his vision for California in his State of the State speech. It's likely to offer even more of a contrast to President Trump's vision for the country as we continue this ongoing battle over immigration, the environment, and so many other issues between the state of California and the Trump administration. Sandra?
Jonathan Hunt, thank you.
27 past the hour now. The Congresswoman Ilhan Omar apologizing for those comments about what fuels support for Israel on the Hill after criticism from both sides of the aisle. We'll see, let you know what she's saying about that today, Sandra.
Plus, President Trump weighing in on the political scandal in Virginia amid growing calls for the governor and the lieutenant governor to step down. As we analyze all of these big stories, one big question, are Democrats facing a growing crisis in their own party?
He was going to try and imitate Michael Jackson with the moonwalk. Nobody can imitate Michael with the moonwalk. It was a pretty bad situation.
Two big stories now facing the Democratic Party today. First, in the state of Virginia, 4 staffers of Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax have now resigned after 2 women accused him of sexual assault. Meanwhile, you have the ongoing issue with the governor in that state, Governor Northam, and that caught the attention of the president last night in El Paso, Texas.
I watched his news conference. It was pretty sad. It was a sad look. Let them figure out what to do. But I felt sorry for his wife. And his wife saved him from doing, as you know, Michael Jackson.
That from Laura Ingram's show last night. Garrett Tenney this morning, live back in Richmond, Virginia. Where do things stand now with the lieutenant governor, the second in charge, Garrett?
Well, Bill, the walls are really closing in on Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax. The law firm where he works has placed him on leave while it investigates the sexual assault allegations, and his inner circle is quickly shrinking as well. Since Friday, 4 of his staff have resigned following the accusations that came forward from a second woman. That leaves him now with just 2 people working for him in the lieutenant governor's office. Despite that, and despite the widespread calls for his resignation, he is refusing to step down, and he's expected to be here at the Capitol today presiding over the Senate. Last night, President Trump echoed what a lot of Democrats are worried about, that these scandals in Virginia will have a significant impact on state elections this year, as well as national elections in 2020.
Terrible situation. I think that the Republicans are going to do very well in Virginia. I think a lot of things are happening in Virginia. I think Virginia is ready to flip over to something. And I'll tell you, African Americans are coming to the Republican Party like nobody can believe.
And those concerns are exactly why Democrats are continuing to call on the governor, lieutenant governor, and some for the attorney general as well to step down to avoid any impact on those elections coming up.
So I mentioned 2 women have gone public. What are the accusers of Fairfax saying about that, Garrett?
Well, both women want to testify at impeachment hearings for the lieutenant governor, but for now, those impeachment hearings have been put on hold, and they are not moving forward with them. Last night, the attorney for one of those women, the second accuser, Meredith Watson, said in a statement, Meredith Watson asked the Virginia legislature to hold hearings regardless of what they are called and to reject a secret and delayed proceeding. Both victims of his sexual assault have agreed to testify, and they will produce witnesses and documents to show their honesty and good character. Please do not allow these women to be further victimized by delay and defamation. And Bill, tonight we will hear from the first accuser, Vanessa Tyson, for the first time since she came forward. She is scheduled to speak at an event at Stanford University that has been scheduled for a long time. The topic she will be addressing is the Me Too movement.
Very interesting. Garrett Tenney, thank you. Live back there in Richmond. Sam.
Well, now to the second story that has Democrats scrambling to react. Top Democrats condemning anti-Semitism comments after Congresswoman Ilhan Omar suggests controversial support for Israel is fueled by donations from pro-Israel lobbying group AIPAC. Here's one Democratic senator reacting to that claim.
The suggestion that AIPAC has influence because of the Benjamins, completely wrong. Absolutely wrong. It's an offensive anti-Semitic stereotype. It's wrong in that way, and it's also factually wrong.
Let's bring in Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Dr. Jasser, appreciate your time this morning. Perhaps this is a learning opportunity. You just heard Tim Kaine there, a Democrat, obviously speaking out very strongly against the comments from the Congresswoman. First, just your reaction this morning as we continue to watch Democrats deal with this situation here.
Well, I think, we're learning, and America should now be learning what we Muslim reformers are dealing with. The left has been lifting up Islamists to become the standard bearer of our community when, in fact, they're radicals. And we have to understand what Congresswoman Ilhan Omar is. She's a byproduct of the Islamist movement, and the left has had this sort of red-green axis, this coalition between the socialist movements of the world and the far left and the Islamist movement. And we see in her comments about Israel, her anti-Semitism, the same thing you see at the UN, where Iran, Saudi Arabia, all the Islamist countries of the OIC are constantly attacking Israel. So her worldview is coming to be, no matter how much she tries to apologize it off and dismiss it, she is full frontal Islamism. And this is what we in the Muslim community deal with, and the left now has to sort of deal with this unholy alliance with the Islamists and the collectivists, where they view, the Islamists view every other religious community as a whole. So they collectivize the Jews, they collectivize Christians, they collectivize America. And being a congressperson should not be on-the-job training in Americanism.
So to be clear, she's apologized for these comments. It took some time, but a long list of Democrats came out against those comments, including Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. Leading Democrats put out a statement against her comments. She has said unequivocally that she apologizes for those. She didn't mean to offend anyone, and she does appreciate this as a learning matter for her. Perhaps take the opportunity. Tell us about AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. What does it do? Who does it support? How is the money spent? Address at the root of this issue, because at the end of her apology, she said this: I reaffirm the problematic role of lobbyists in our politics, whether it be AIPAC, the NRA, or the fossil fuel industry. It's gone on too long, and we must be willing to address it. So she apologizes, but then says this.
Well, Sandra, the obvious thing for me as a Muslim reformer is, where are her comments about the Turkish lobby that's all Islamist, or the Saudi lobby, or the Iranian lobby that got the Iran deal through with the Obama administration? She's ignorant of that, and yet wants to criticize 90% of the American public that's pro-Israel. So if the American Congress is so pro-Israel, maybe it's a manifestation of the American voters and their wishes, rather than simply being so negative about lobbyists, which is so currently the mantra of the left. So I think it really gives her a pass, and it's a bigotry of low expectations not to hold her accountable to the ideologies which really would expose whether she's truly honest. What is her position on radical Islamism and the root cause of her anti-Semitism? I wouldn't believe her apology until she really says, you know what, I need to go through rehab against the ideology of Islamism and understand the roots of hate of anti-Semitism from the scriptures and other ideologies that have shaped a lot of the imams and clerics in our community.
And a reminder, she sits on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Lee Zeldin, Liz Cheney, Steve Scalise are members of Congress who are asking for her to be taken off of that committee. We'll ask Steve Scalise about that coming up. He joins us in the 11 o'clock hour. Nancy Pelosi, again, she's called these comments deeply offensive. They have come out and rebuked her. The Wall Street Journal put out a piece, the editorial board, titled "The Education of Ilhan Omar," talking about Democratic leaders rebuking their anti-Israel freshman colleague. And they write this: Democrats risk losing moderates as well as part of their base if these sentiments begin to define their party's view of Israel in the public mind. They're wise to send a rebuke now. How should the party move forward in the wake of this moment, do you think, Doctor?
Well, I think this is a teaching moment to say that, you know what, the Muslim community and who they choose to become the standard bearers can have an impact on how they're perceived by the normal Muslims in our community that are not Islamists, that are not anti-Israel, that like 90% of the American population are pro-Israel and believe it's a secular democracy, the only real democracy in the Middle East that is the closest ally of the United States. So that is what the Democrats should look at. Does Ilhan Omar represent the majority of Muslims and other minority groups that they claim to be such a defender of, or does it marginalize reformists and secular Muslims, feminists and gay rights activists that are supposedly part of their left wing of their party, and yet they're alienating by lifting up radicals who have a worldview like the OIC, the Islamic cooperation countries, rather than the mainstream American Muslim and mainstream American viewpoints in Congress.
Yeah, the Wall Street Journal piece, really interesting. It gives kudos to House Democratic leaders who slapped down one of their own, as it writes, for her ugly comments. It goes on to talk about the rebuke from party leaders, especially important because the anti-Israel sentiment is growing on the left. It actually uses numbers to back that up. 79% of Republicans sympathize more with Israel than the Palestinians, according to a Pew survey from last year. The split among Democrats is interesting. 27% for Israel, 25% for the Palestinians. Final thoughts from you this morning as this story continues, Dr. Jasser.
Yeah, that education, as far as the left is concerned, this didn't just come up this week from Ilhan Omar's issues. Remember, the anti-Semitism came out of the Women's March, as we saw that falling apart because of their allegiance with Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam, and they couldn't separate themselves from that, and also the far-left socialist collectivism, if you will. So this has been a brewing global impact that we're seeing now with the anti-Semitism that they're going to have to deal with and realize, are they going to talk to mainstream America, or are they going to talk to simply the radical left?
So is it fair to say you don't think her apology was enough?
Not at all. There's no realism in it. It was simply a forced statement. And just look at what will come next out of her. I'm sure it'll again reveal itself to her Islamist worldview over the next few weeks.
All right, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, thank you. We appreciate your time this morning and your thoughts on the issue. Thank you.
It's February. We can dream of spring, can't we, Sandra?
Yes,
oh, yeah.
I am.
Golf can help. How about lefty Phil Mickelson won the AT&T Pebble Beach record, 5th career win at Pebble Beach. Mickelson's never won a U.S. Open tournament, but guess where the U.S. Open is this year?
I know.
It's Pebble Beach, and it's on Fox. And you got to think he's an early favorite right now.
I know you're a Tiger Woods fan. Are you a lefty fan?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Big time, yeah.
He's never won a U.S. Open?
Not a U.S. Open, no. Wow. That's what the Shinnecock deal was so big last year. But listen, that storm, the storms that hit Pebble Beach over the weekend, they just kept coming. I mean, great for skiers and boarders up in Lake Tahoe, but not good for golf. Anyway, congratulations, Phil. Well done. Tournament delayed, but now finished.
Good stuff. All right, well, internal FBI email just released showing exactly what agency lawyers were doing on the same day former director James Comey reopened the Clinton email investigation. An update on a story that you do not want to miss.
Also, a group of sheriffs joining President Trump to talk about how important ICE agents are to protecting their communities. We expect the president to make that a sticking point for any deal. The former acting ICE director is Tom Holman. He's going to make his case coming up next.
These men and women in this country of law enforcement understand very well what's going on in our border. We've got to secure it. Our hats are off to the president, the vice president.
Retired astronaut Mark Kelly announcing his next mission. He's planning to run for John McCain's Senate seat from Arizona in 2020 as a Democrat. The 54-year-old turned to politics after his wife, Congressman Gabrielle Giffords, survived an assassination attempt in 2011 in a mass shooting. Kelly could take on Republican Martha McSally for that Senate seat.
If you do anything to cut ICE funding, you devastate our community.